We are anonymous. We do not forget. We do not forgive. And we do not stay silent when war crimes are committed in the name of the American people. Tonight, we reveal one of the most disturbing operations in modern American military history. An operation that involved the deliberate execution of shipwrecked survivors floating helplessly in the Caribbean Sea. Men who posed no threat. Men who were waving for help. Men who were shirtless, burned, clinging to the wreckage of their destroyed vessel. And the Pentagon, under direct orders from the highest levels of the Trump administration, authorized strike after strike until they were dead. This is not speculation. This is not conspiracy. The evidence exists, the videos exist, the testimonies exist, and tonight we expose everything. What you are about to hear will challenge everything you believed about American military conduct. It will expose the hollow rhetoric of fighting drug traffickers. It will reveal how an administration weaponized the most powerful military on earth to execute helpless men hundreds of miles from American shores. And it will demonstrate, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the laws of war were shattered not by accident, not by fog of war confusion, but by deliberate command decisions made with full knowledge of what was happening. The Pentagon does not want you to see the full footage. The administration does not want you to know what really happened. Congress, spineless and complicit, has abandoned its oversight responsibilities. But we have obtained the truth. We have analyzed every available document, every public testimony, every leaked communication. And we are here to lay it all before you. Let us start at the beginning. In the waters of the Caribbean, far from the eyes of journalists and far from the reach of accountability, the United States has been conducting what can only be described as an undeclared war. B-1 bombers, B-52 heavy bombers, attack submarines, a full carrier battle group, Marine amphibious units, Army Special Operations Forces. This is not a drug interdiction mission. This is the firepower required to invade a nation. This is the capability to topple a government. General Barry McCaffrey, a retired four-star Army commander who served as the nation's drug czar under President Clinton, laid the explosive truth on the table when he stated clearly that the War Powers Act has been violated. The President of the United States unilaterally deployed massive military force to the Caribbean without congressional authorization, without transparency, and without any legitimate legal grounding. And what was the stated justification for this extraordinary deployment of American military might? Drug interdiction. The administration claimed they were targeting narco-terrorists. They claimed they were protecting America from the scourge of drugs flooding our streets. But when we examined the evidence, when we traced the supply chains, when we followed the money, the truth became undeniable. This was never about drugs. Cocaine production is centered in Colombia, where production has tripled in the last decade with minimal American intervention. Fentanyl, the synthetic killer devastating communities across West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, and beyond, originates from China and Mexico. The Caribbean boats carry cocaine, not fentanyl. And Venezuela, the nation whose waters have become the primary theater of these operations, is merely a transit country. A waypoint, not a production center. So why Venezuela? Why now? Why this unprecedented military buildup in Caribbean waters? The answer lies not in drug enforcement, but in something far more valuable. Venezuelan oil, the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Reserves that American oil companies, Shell, ExxonMobil, BP British Petroleum, have coveted for decades. Reserves that became inaccessible when the Maduro government refused to bow to American corporate interests. When we analyze the military positioning, when we examine the capabilities deployed, the conclusion became inescapable. The United States has assembled the firepower necessary for active combat operations to bring down the Maduro government in Venezuela. General McCaffrey himself stated this openly. What every military analyst sees when they look at American naval power in the Caribbean is the capability to conduct regime change operations and seize access to Venezuelan oil. This is the context. This is the framework within which the executions occurred. Because, make no mistake, What happened to those shipwrecked survivors was not a military engagement. It was an execution. The date was September 2nd. A small boat, suspected of carrying narcotics, was detected in Caribbean waters. American forces engaged. The first strike was devastating. The boat was destroyed. Men died in the initial attack. But 2 survived. 2 men managed to cling to the wreckage of their vessel as it capsized and burned around them. What happened next shocked even us. According to testimonies provided to congressional lawmakers, these 2 survivors were visible on the remains of their destroyed boat. They were shirtless. They were burned. They had no weapons. They had no communications equipment. They had no engines. They had no ability to move. They were, by every definition recognized under international law, shipwrecked persons entitled to protection. They appeared to be waving. Some accounts suggest they were waving for help. Others suggest they were simply trying to signal their presence. It does not matter which interpretation is correct. What matters is what happened after. Admiral Frank M. Bradley, the commander overseeing the operation, ordered a second strike, and then a third strike, and then a fourth strike. 4 separate attack runs on 2 helpless men clinging to floating debris in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. When Admiral Bradley met behind closed doors with congressional lawmakers, he attempted to justify these follow-up strikes by claiming the survivors posed a continuing threat. He stated they appeared to be getting back into the fight, on a burning, capsized boat, with no weapons, no radio, no engines, no ability to move, shirtless and burned. General McCaffrey called this claim what it is: utter nonsense. He stated clearly that the assertion these 2 incapacitated individuals represented an ongoing threat to the United States was absurd on its face. And he is correct. There is nothing credible, nothing logical, and nothing lawful about the excuse used to justify killing men who were clearly incapacitated and clearly in distress. But that was not all. When we investigated further, we discovered that the Pentagon's public relations operation had already begun covering their tracks. The video released to social media, the footage shown to the American public, was edited. It showed only the first strike, the initial engagement that destroyed the boat. What it did not show was the follow-up strikes. It did not show the 2 survivors on the capsized vessel. It did not show the decision to attack them again and again until they were dead. But congressional lawmakers saw the full footage. Representative Adam Smith, ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, described what he witnessed. 2 half-naked men atop a sliver of capsized boat. 2 classically shipwrecked people. He called the decision to kill them highly questionable. Representative Jim Himes, a member of the House Intelligence Committee who is accustomed to reviewing wartime footage, was visibly shaken after viewing the material. He emphasized a principle that every American service member is trained to understand. Once individuals are rendered incapable of combat, under both United States military law and international humanitarian law, you cannot kill them. These men posed no threat. There were no weapons visible. There was no communication capability. There was no justification for what was done. The evidence is clear. The timeline is documented. The videos exist, and the Pentagon chose to execute shipwrecked survivors rather than rescue them. Now let us examine how this atrocity connects to the broader pattern of lawlessness emanating from this administration. When we trace the chain of command, we found ourselves confronting a disturbing picture of an administration that has abandoned any pretense of legal constraint. At the apex sits Donald Trump, a president who deployed massive military force to the Caribbean without ever seeking congressional authorization as required by the War Powers Act. Below him sits Pete Hegseth, a Secretary of Defense with no military command experience, who has demonstrated a disturbing appetite for violence in his public communications. When strikes occurred in the Caribbean, Hegseth did not respond with the measured professionalism expected of a Pentagon leader. Instead, he posted celebratory imagery online. When MAGA podcasters called for more explosions, more boat strikes, more violence, Hegseth responded with chilling enthusiasm. "Your wish is our command." He announced that American forces had just sunk another narco boat. This response came on the very day Congress was meeting with the commander responsible for the September 2nd boat strike. The strike that left 2 survivors, the survivors who were subsequently executed. The implications are staggering. The Secretary of Defense was publicly celebrating violence, while lawmakers were privately learning that shipwrecked men had been killed in follow-up strikes. The disconnect between public propaganda and private reality could not be more stark. And then came the devastating detail that revealed how this administration responds to internal dissent. 4-star Admiral Holsey, head of the Central American Corridor, raised concerns about the legality of the strikes. He questioned whether executing shipwrecked survivors complied with the laws of war. He may have been suspected of leaking information about the operations to the press. Admiral Holsey was forced out. Early reports suggested he had retired voluntarily, but when journalists investigated, the truth emerged. Pete Hegseth directly confronted the admiral with words that should terrify every American who values constitutional governance. You are either on the team or you are not. When you get an order, you move out fast and you do not ask questions. This is not military leadership. This is dictatorship language. This is the vocabulary of authoritarian regimes, where questioning illegal orders results in immediate removal. This is precisely the opposite of what American military training emphasizes, the legal and moral obligation of every service member to refuse unlawful orders. And here is the bitter irony that exposes the administration's hypocrisy. Pete Hegseth, obsessed with plugging leaks and punishing those suspected of sharing information with the press, is himself a leaker. An Inspector General report released during this same period confirmed that Hegseth had leaked classified strike plans. The Secretary of Defense, who forced out an admiral for suspected leaking, had himself compromised classified operational information. The pattern becomes clear. This administration does not punish leaking. It punishes dissent. It punishes questioning. It punishes anyone who dares to suggest that executing shipwrecked survivors might violate the laws of war. Now Admiral Frank Bradley, the commander who ordered the follow-up strikes that killed the survivors, has been promoted to head Southern Command. He saw what happened to Admiral Holsey. He knows that honesty could cost him his career. And so he stands by the absurd narrative that 2 shirtless men on burning debris posed a continuing threat to the most powerful military force in human history. Let us now examine the legal framework that was shattered by these actions. The War Powers Act exists precisely to prevent a president from unilaterally committing American forces to combat operations without congressional authorization. It requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of introducing armed forces into hostilities. It mandates that forces must be withdrawn within 60 days unless Congress provides specific authorization. Trump never sought this authorization. The massive military deployment to the Caribbean, the combat operations conducted against suspected drug traffickers, the execution of shipwreck survivors, all of this occurred without the congressional approval required by law. Senator Tom Cotton, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, attempted to defend the administration's actions in a televised exchange that exposed the hollowness of the legal justifications. When pressed for the specific congressional authorization allowing strikes on suspected drug smugglers in Caribbean waters, Cotton could not provide one. He deflected. He mentioned Obama. He talked about drone strikes in other contexts. He insisted the president has inherent authority to target foreign terrorist organizations. But here is where the administration's own rhetoric undermines its legal position. They initially classified the targeted groups as foreign terrorist organizations, but they subsequently shifted to calling them non-state actors. This semantic change is not accidental. It reflects the administration's awareness that their legal justifications were crumbling, and it nullifies the very authority Cotton claimed supported the strikes. Judge Advocate Generals, the military lawyers responsible for ensuring operations comply with the laws of war, issued warnings that should alarm every American. They warned that the administration's assertion of authority to designate any group as a foreign terrorist organization and then launch deadly force as a first resort is both chilling and unlawful. It transforms the United States from a nation that uses military force as a last resort into one that kills without oversight, without accountability, without limits. Ben Rhodes, who served as National Security Advisor under President Obama, added another devastating truth to the record. The video evidence is undeniable. There may be multiple videos documenting the strikes. There are certainly communications logs. There is a paper trail documenting every decision, every order, every justification offered by commanders in the field and officials in Washington. And Rhodes explained precisely why the laws of war exist. They exist to prevent exactly what Trump ordered. You cannot kill people who pose no threat. You cannot kill people who are in duress. You cannot kill people who are wounded. You cannot kill people who are shipwrecked. These are not arbitrary rules invented by bleeding heart lawyers. These are principles forged in the blood of centuries of conflict. They exist because every military force understands that its own personnel may someday be in distress, may someday be wounded, may someday be shipwrecked. The protections we extend to our enemies are the protections we expect for ourselves. When Trump ordered the execution of shipwrecked survivors, he did not just violate international law. He endangered every American service member who might someday find themselves at the mercy of an enemy. He shattered the principle of reciprocity that protects our troops in future conflicts. And what of the claimed purpose of these operations? What of the war on drugs that supposedly justified deploying carrier battle groups and bomber squadrons to the Caribbean? We have already established that cocaine production is centered in Colombia, not Venezuela. We have already noted that fentanyl, the drug actually killing Americans in epidemic numbers, originates from China and Mexico. But there is another piece of evidence that demolishes the administration's narrative. Days before the shipwrecked survivors were executed, Trump pardoned a convicted drug lord. Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former right-wing president of Honduras, had been sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Trump's own Department of Justice established that Hernandez helped transform Honduras into one of the most dangerous narcotics corridors in the world. He facilitated the flow of drugs that killed American citizens. He was a genuine narco-terrorist by any reasonable definition. And Trump erased his sentence. Hernandez did not even serve 1 year. So spare us the lie that this is about fighting drugs. An administration genuinely committed to stopping drug trafficking would not pardon convicted drug lords. An administration genuinely focused on protecting American lives would target fentanyl networks, not Caribbean transit routes. An administration genuinely concerned about narcotics would invest in treatment and prevention, not aircraft carriers. The truth is transparent for those willing to see it. These operations were never about drugs. They were about Venezuelan oil. They were about demonstrating military capability for regime change. They were about giving Trump's billionaire oil allies access to reserves they have coveted for decades. And in service of these goals, shipwrecked men were executed in the Caribbean Sea. What does this mean for the future? What are the implications of an administration that kills without oversight and covers its actions with edited videos and absurd justifications? The precedent being established is terrifying. If Trump can justify killing people hundreds of miles from American shores simply because drugs might eventually reach the United States, then he can justify killing anyone anywhere under the same logic. There is no limiting principle. There is no boundary that cannot be crossed. Today, it is suspected drug runners in Caribbean waters. Tomorrow, it could be political opponents labeled as threats. It could be journalists designated as enemies. It could be protesters classified as terrorists. This is not hyperbole. This is the logical endpoint of the authority the administration claims. When a president asserts the unilateral power to designate any group as a threat, and then eliminate that threat with military force, the only remaining check is the conscience of those giving the orders. And we have seen what happens to those who exercise conscience. Admiral Holsey questioned the legality of the strikes. He was forced out. The message to every other military commander is clear. Obey without question, or your career is over. Congress, the institution designed by the founders to serve as a check on executive war-making, has abandoned its responsibilities. Republican senators defend the indefensible. Democratic representatives express concern, but take no meaningful action. The War Powers Act is violated openly, and the legislative branch responds with hearings that lead nowhere. The courts might eventually intervene, but legal challenges take years, and by the time any ruling is issued, the precedents will be established, the victims will be dead, and the administration will have moved on to new outrages. This leaves the American people. It leaves you. The evidence we have compiled tonight is not classified. The testimonies we have cited are on the public record. The videos, at least the edited versions, have been released. The statements from General McCaffrey, from Representative Smith, from Representative Himes, from Ben Rhodes, all of this is available to anyone willing to look. What has been missing is synthesis. What has been missing is the willingness to connect the dots and state clearly what these connections reveal. What has been missing is the courage to call an execution an execution. We are anonymous. We provide that synthesis. We connect those dots. We have the courage to speak truth. 2 men survived the initial strike on September 2nd. They clung to the wreckage of their destroyed vessel. They were burned. They were shirtless. They had no weapons. They had no way to fight. They had no way to flee. They appeared to be waving. And the United States military, under orders from Admiral Frank Bradley, with the knowledge and approval of Secretary Pete Hegseth, acting under the authority claimed by President Donald Trump, struck them again, and again, and again, until they were dead. This is not combat. This is not self-defense. This is not even the morally dubious but legally defensible killing that sometimes occurs in warfare. This is the execution of helpless human beings by the most powerful military force in human history. And it was done in your name, with your tax dollars, under the authority of officials you elected or who were appointed by those you elected. The question now is what you will do with this knowledge. Will you look away? Will you accept the administration's absurd justification that shirtless men on burning debris posed a continuing threat? Will you allow edited videos to substitute for truth? Will you permit Congress to abdicate its oversight responsibilities without consequence? Or will you demand accountability? We cannot make that choice for you. We can only ensure you have the information necessary to make it. The documents exist. The testimonies are on record. The chain of command is clear. The violations of the War Powers Act are documented. The breach of the laws of war is undeniable. The cover-up through edited videos is proven. The punishment of dissenters like Admiral Holsey is confirmed. What remains is action. Share this message. Spread the truth. Demand that your representatives in Congress exercise their constitutional authority. Insist that the military officials who ordered these strikes face accountability. Refuse to accept the normalization of executing shipwrecked survivors. The administration believes it can kill without consequence because it believes you will not pay attention. It believes you are too distracted, too cynical, too overwhelmed to care about what happens in Caribbean waters hundreds of miles from your homes. Prove them wrong. The men who died on September 2nd were not American citizens. They may have been involved in drug trafficking. They may have been criminals by any reasonable standard. But they were human beings. And when they were floating helplessly on the wreckage of their destroyed vessel, waving for help, they were entitled to the protections that civilized nations have agreed upon for centuries. Those protections were denied them. And if we accept that denial, if we allow it to pass without consequence, we have surrendered something essential about who we claim to be. This is not about defending drug traffickers. This is about defending the principle that the powerful cannot simply kill the helpless whenever it is convenient. This is about insisting that even in warfare, there are lines that cannot be crossed. This is about demanding that American military force be used lawfully, transparently, and with proper authorization. We are anonymous. We have exposed what others tried to hide. We have connected the dots that the administration hoped would remain separate. We have stated clearly what the evidence proves. The Pentagon executed shipwrecked survivors in the Caribbean Sea. They did so under orders from commanders who answered to Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump. They did so without congressional authorization. They did so in violation of the laws of war. and they covered their actions with edited videos and absurd justifications. This is the truth. What you do with it is your choice. We are anonymous. We do not forget. We do not forgive. And we will continue to expose the crimes of the powerful until accountability is achieved. Expect us.